Hey welding fans, let's go over some of the most asked questions about underwater welding. I got the opportunity to go down to Ocean Corporation in Houston, Texas when we were on tour. While I was down there, I got some really good insight, so maybe I can help out. Underwater welding, it's a part of another trade. It's kind of a small part. What I learned is you learn how to dive. It's called hard hat diving. You learn how to dive deep with special equipment. Realistically, you're going to be doing more bolt up, running power tools, a lot of rigging, picking up pieces of pipeline or whatever. Rarely do they do a lot of underwater welding, most of the time just as a repair. But I got the opportunity to try it. I have my weld, I will show you. Be easy on me. Part of it's good, the other part's not so good. I am welding essentially 70-18 underwater, and I've only done it once. So while I was down there, we got geared up, a lot of heavy equipment. It only works really good when you're underwater. It kind of helps you float when you're underwater, but when you're on the surface, it must weigh 50, 60 pounds. The helmet on there must be 30 pounds. Risk reward, I think if you're going to be an underwater welder, the reward isn't going to be that great. You have to be able to do a lot of other things. Like I said, fit up, rigging, underwater lifting, heavy lifting, a lot of bolt up. They use a lot of power tools. You got to be willing to live with a couple other individuals for weeks and months on end in a space about the size of your kitchen. They get in a decompression chamber, they adjust their body to the pressures that they're going to be working at, and they send them down to that depth. One crew stays on the surface and relaxes, the other crew, they go down and do some work. I don't know what shifts look like, if it's 8 or 12 hours or whatever, but when you're at that pressure, you don't get to just come out. Basically, you go down, you do your work, you come up to the decompression chamber, basically your kitchen, lay in your bed in your kitchen, the next crew goes down and does work, and you do that cycle for however long the job takes. That's probably one of the cons in my opinion. It's a lot of close time with some people you may not know very well. As far as the welding part goes, I don't think it pays any more or less to be able to weld. I think that's part of the trade you have to know. The pay comes from how deep you go and how long you've been in the industry. We actually have a hard hat diver at the school right now learning how to weld. Gave me some insight on how it actually works. So when you first break out as a hard hat diver, you end up being a surface tender for quite a while, between a year and 2 years. So you don't even really get a dive unless it's really short-handed. Then after that, you get to go so deep and your pay increases the deeper you go. If you're one of those guys that likes a little bit of an adrenaline rush, likes to be at the bottom of the ocean, and is willing to put in the time, I think the reward can be pretty lucrative. I also think that there's quite a bit of hazard associated with it as well. Although not as much as years ago, technology has progressed like everywhere else. But if you're 800 feet in the ocean and something happens, they can't just rope you to the surface. Like, you're there dealing with it. So yes, a small percentage, probably 15%, maybe 20%. We had a special rod. It was essentially 70-18, but it was coated in wax, like beeswax. So my experience was with 70-18, you fire up on the surface, you fire up, you get your puddle going, and then you get a little bit of an arc length there to manage that puddle. You just kind of float right on the surface of the puddle. When you're underwater, you got to bury that rod. If you get any kind of arc length whatsoever, it snuffs it out. One other thing I noticed is when you fire up, all that energy, that concussion from that electricity starting that rod up, it's like hitting you in the chest the whole time. It's really actually pretty cool. You fire up, you feel that energy hit the iron, and it hits you right in the middle of the chest, just like somebody's tapping on you, and you can hear things a lot better. It's hard to see because that rod's producing a gas for your shielding, which produces bubbles, so you're trying to look around bubbles. The wax flared out kind of in this skirt pattern, so you're trying to look around that wax while it's burning down. But essentially, you fire up when you're underwater, you lay that rod on the plate, and you just kind of feel it out. If you've welded on the surface for any amount of time, really, you can kind of feel how much you have to feed that rod to make a weld. It's really pretty unique. I don't know, the backlight, the way the lenses and the hoods are set up, I think there could be a better design, and maybe there is one out there, but it was really hard to see because you get a lot of that backlight in behind your shaded lens, so it's a reflection, kind of drowns out your weld. I don't know, I could have stayed down there for hours. I got 15, 20 minutes down there. I really enjoyed it. I don't know of any long-lasting ones. Probably no more than just regular welding on the surface. I think if you can make it a career and you follow the safety rules, you can make it a long career. One of the biggest hazards is decompression sickness, also known as the bends. If you come to the surface too fast, you boil the nitrogen out of your blood, which fills your vessels with nitrogen gas and eventually an aneurysm in your brain, and it'll kill you. Or I've done some research on what happens when decompression chambers go bad. And so if you're compressed to couple hundred PSI or whatever decompression chamber keeps you at, and somebody just happens to open that door, get that door open, it literally sucks bodies, bones, and parts right through the crack. So pretty close hazards that way, but long term, I don't think it's any worse than welding. Basically, you go to a school just like Western Welding Academy. They teach you all the technical stuff. Ocean Corporation was like a 7-month program. They go through all the safety, how to maintain your gear, actual dives in their tanks. I think that's more of the welding part than anything, is they go down and do a lot of demolition, which is mag rods, your magnesium oxygen rods, exothermic rods, similar to an air arc but without electricity. Anyways, you go to school. I think they line you up with the job, much like we do. You put in your time at the beginning and you're off and running. From what I understand from people I've talked to is there's a lot of work inland. So like dam repair and cleanup, things at the bottom of lakes, equipment recovery, whatever that looks like. More inland than there is offshore, it sounds like. But I got pretty limited knowledge of it just from what I've talked to people who have experienced it. I think it can be. I think it can be more so if you're an idiot. If you're gonna be stupid, you gotta be tough, right? So you make it as dangerous as you want to, but I also think that there's safety rules out there and people that have made it a lot safer in the industry. It's not very lucrative to go do a job that pays well if you're just gonna die doing it, so keep that in mind. I've never heard of anybody, like I've never met anybody that said they were, but I can imagine that it'd be pretty miserable down there if you don't really like that job. People being down there in the dark, in the same place, all alone, all the time, or with the same person, to me would be real similar to going to a job 7, 8, 12 hours away from home when your significant other works and they can't come visit you, and you got to be away from home in a foreign place, you know, in somebody else's house or a rented room or whatever. It gets pretty lonely. So I'm guessing those guys, they get conditioned to it. Probably a little depression sets in, but I think they're used to it. I bet it's comparable. I think underwater welding, depending on the time you have in the career and the position you work yourself into. If you're one of those guys that dives really deep consistently, I think those guys make bank. I had an inspector one time, came down from Alaska, had been an underwater hard hat diver, and was trying to explain to me how the pay scale works. And you get, I think, so many $100 up to like 100 feet, and then it's kind of like overtime. And then after 100 feet, you get a couple $100 more per hour or whatever, per foot, I don't know what it is. And then after a couple of 100 feet, you get more money. Those guys that go deep, I think they probably put in $200,000–300,000 a year in 6–8 months or whatever. It's just like welding. You run a welding truck, get on the right job, know the right people, spend some time in the industry. It's not unheard of to consistently make $200,000 a year. And you get to run around on the surface. You don't have to hang out in some, I think it's called a dive bell, where they do a lot of their work. I think welders probably make more in the long run.